Okay, so um, many technical difficulties here and a lot of distractions, very relevant to this talk. Okay, so um, I'm going to um, not put this into full screen mode because apparently there's an issue where the entire screen goes black. Um, but welcome to today's lightning talk. So today I'm going to be talking about 5 tips to stay focused in a distracted world. Um, for me, this has recently been a pretty significant area of focus for myself in terms of how I manage my own time. It's the one resource that everyone has that we all, I think, in today's society and world, don't have enough of or don't feel that we have enough of. So, the idea of this is to give some tips and simple ways that you can take control of your time to achieve a better work-life balance. And taking control of your time, I think, is really just how you spend your time when you're focused. So, um, just going to start by talking about the impact, 5 quick tips, and then I'll have Q&A. So, the impact, um, there's 56 interruptions a day for the average employee. Um, 3 minutes spent working before the average employee switches tasks. There's 2 hours spent recovering from distractions per day. And when you have an 8 hour day, 1 hour of lunch, 7 hours, it really only leaves you 5 hours to actually get stuff done. There's 80% of interruptions are considered trivial um, by those that are interrupted. 36 times is the average employee checks their email in 1 hour. And 16 minutes is the time spent refocusing after handling an incoming email. The source of this is all from an Atlassian report related to just time in general, but I think this is focus to me is the opposite of really being distracted, and I think this really talks to a lot of the data around the impact and how that affects our work. And for me personally, like when I'm unable to get stuff done in the day, I don't feel great about what is being completed. And when I'm in my most focused times, I'm able to feel good about the accomplishments that I get done for the day. And I've noticed as I really place an effort in managing my time and managing the way that I focus on things and interact with people and manage interruptions, I've been able to just really feel better leaving the office for the day or moving on to other tasks. And to me, focus is not solely about work, it's about how you spend your time in general. When I have time that I spend with friends or family, a lot of that is for me, like I like to spend that time really being present and not distracted as well. And these are tips that can be applied for work or for outside of work or just in general. The first one is meditate. I think this is pretty interesting data around what they found. So a review of 23 different studies found that in general, people who've been meditating for just a few months perform better on tasks that test their ability to shut out distractions, while longer-term meditators show a markedly improved ability to maintain focus for especially long periods of time. Meditation is shown to have a ton of different benefits, and I find that it's personally helped me in many different ways, managing like mental health and stress. When I do have a regular meditation practice, it's been really beneficial for me. So, just some quick tips, like using an app like Headspace is really great to get started. If you don't meditate already, I've found that was like the easiest entry point for me was through guided meditation. Also, practicing regularly. As you continue to practice meditation, and I think this is really about having a lifestyle around it. As you practice regularly, your brain continues to form pathways that help with just a wide variety of different areas, and this has been proven time and time again. Another thing that I recently just started doing, meditation for me is first thing that I do in the morning, before anything. And one thing that I've recently incorporated, was just a very simple reward for when you practice. So for me, it's nothing major, but once I meditate, then I can start looking at my phone or checking out the news or anything. So it's the absolute first thing that I do. I sit up and I meditate. I've been trying to meditate every day. The other one is creating a distraction-free environment. So investing time in removing distractions from your working environment or just around you. And distractions can come from people, devices. You can also distract yourself very easily. Some of the things that I've found really beneficial are turning off notifications, and that is email, cell phone, you know, not completely turning off email, but most of the applications or products that I use on a daily basis have a million notifications. What I've done is created smart rules in Gmail that just basically mark as read and archive specific notifications, so they're not gone forever, but they're not consistently interrupting my inbox. And another thing is related to promotions or other information that just comes in the inbox. It's really distracting. It has been really distracting. The other thing is I've turned off pretty much all of my notifications on my phone, and the only ones that I really get are WhatsApp messages and phone calls. So that's really helped to remove those distractions and have an environment where I'm not seeing everything that's would take my attention away from what I'm trying to focus on. The other one is, I think, blocking out time in your calendar, helps to uh, have a distraction-free environment. Another one is just shutting off the internet sometimes. I've noticed that this has worked really well for me when I've traveled and I'm planning to do some work on a flight and there isn't Wi-Fi. It's actually some of my most productive times are then. Also, another one that I think is really key is communicating with other people around you and informing them that you're not to be disturbed and you're working on something. So, in an open office or environment where there's people around that can just come up to your desk and interrupt you, I think that's very often a common thing that can happen is someone can come up and just like interrupt you from what you're looking at. And one place that I remember this being really, really distracting for me and stopped me from really getting anything done was when I was writing code and doing more development work. And that was basically the only time that I would really get any work done would be when it was after hours and no one was working and no one was in the office and no one was around and no one was there to interrupt me. So I would sit down and work till really late in the night and be pretty effective when I didn't have interruptions. The downfall of that is it was late and took time out of my personal time. So there was, you know, for me, I started to form some sort of resentment towards like the work that I was doing because it was having a negative impact on my personal life and time. The other one I think that, and some of this is a lot of what I've learned from Agile and from some Agile methods. There's a idea of time boxing. Scrum is how you iterate in product development, software development. It's used actually in many different areas, but that's a 2-week time boxed area where things are planned and worked on in a daily way with certain ceremonies that come into play. So with time boxed intervals, you're able to say when the start time is and when the stop time is. I think one really interesting thing that comes into play with time boxing is there's a psychological principle called Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law, it basically states that work will expand to fill the time that you allow for its completion. And I think this is really powerful, and I've noticed when I've set a very conscious effort to either leave at a certain time or there's absolute like things that need to happen within a certain time frame, I work so much more efficiently. Um, and it takes some dedication and commitment to really commit to both start and stop times, which I think are key to this. But what I found that works is, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment, but just planning and like using your calendar to actually set up the time box. So if you have from 3 to 4 p.m., set up the task and say, I'm going to work on this task from this start time to this end time. I've seen this really be effective in terms of like inbox management. I get several, I don't know the amount, but a lot of emails. And in a day, I've been time boxing the amount of time I'll focus on my inbox. And what that's allowed me to do is really focus on the emails that matter, help me to better prioritize and ensure that that time is used really effectively. Another thing is like time boxing, and I mentioned rewards related to meditation. I think this is another aspect. A lot of this is comes out of a recent book that I read called Indistractable. Talks all about distractions and how basically technology products and the environment we're in is an interruption to our our work and our ability to focus. So I think leisurely like play should also be time boxed, or actually, I think it can be time boxed. And in some instances, like for me, if I'm gonna like look at news or do some research or read about something or maybe go on Facebook, I think setting a limit to the time that you're gonna allow yourself to do that and maybe using that as a reward can help you structure your day a little bit better. Looks like there's one was repeated. Um, so number four is planning your objectives. And I think planning is really helpful when done on a daily basis. Helps you look at your day and like what you're looking to achieve, as well as these other methods that may come into play when, such as time boxing when you're looking to focus on something. So breaking down your tasks and prioritizing what would be the most impactful thing for maybe it's your daily or quarterly or weekly or, maybe it's for your morning objective. This really helps you when you're able to plan and complete the work for the day, helps you feel really fulfilled. And for me, it's resulted in less stress. So some tips are, planning before starting anything else, first thing in the morning, and prioritizing as well as not overcommitting. I think if you overplan and you don't have the time, that ends up just feeling like you didn't really accomplish anything. Focus on one large or 2 to 3 small tasks per day. So, not trying to take on everything under the sun, I think is related to not committing. Uh, Also using estimations to assess a task. And I think for me, it's been helpful to look at, really what's required and documenting what is needed. And then estimating that. So, if it's 3 hours for a specific task, and I know that there's some research that needs to be done, some planning, and maybe some feedback that's needed, I'll look to plan all those things together. Another key thing for planning is very often our work depends on other people or other activities or other information, and I think for me, it's been helpful to identify what are those dependencies and actually prioritize those. So, for instance, if I need feedback from someone to complete a task, maybe I'll look at scheduling that time to get feedback from someone else or schedule time to review that with someone else. Really helps to remove the risk of completing something on time. Number five is limiting work in progress. This is also an agile method. It comes from manufacturing space and also software and production. So, there's a lot of research that has been done on multitasking, and for the most part, it's really actually not something that's possible. And when you limit, basically what happens with work in progress, I'll talk about it from a production standpoint, is when there's many things that are happening in progress, nothing really gets done. So you start to see bottlenecks, things start to build up, and nothing is actually being completed. It's just continuing to build up your like to-do list or task list for what needs to be worked on. So when you're able to focus on one thing at a time and actually complete that one thing, whether it's a larger task broken into smaller tasks, or there's different ways to like look at one task at a time. For me, like, even though I may be looking through multiple emails, but that's really, to me, like one task is like managing my inbox is one specific task. And I limit that to a time box, so that really can help me effectively manage that, combining one work in progress with time boxing. So one thing I think important for the task is defining what it means for something to be done, so you can actually close it out. So also related to planning, just really breaking things down and looking into what needs to be completed before you can check something off as done. Closing other windows or applications, notifications, really anything that can come into play that would interrupt you focusing on one thing at a time. Just the visual aspect of being able to like look and see one thing, if it's on your screen or if it's in a notebook. Sometimes it's really great to separate the technology from what you're working on. I think that's something that I've found really helpful as well. And using a to-do app or task manager also helps, like Trello. There's basically, you have different statuses that a task may be in, and focusing on one in progress task is a really good way to look at that as well. And that's all. So I'd like to just take 5 minutes. If anyone has any questions, I'll address those as well. So Gerardo asked, as a recurrent meditator, do you have any advice to focus on actual meditation? Whenever I try to meditate, I end up thinking on things that are not urgent, but in the back of my mind. So yes, I mean, it's a practice. Meditation is a practice, and I've noticed, like, I've been practicing meditation daily just recently in the past couple of weeks. It's there's it's really kind of, there's nothing that's important or unimportant. It's really about like the practice is developing your mind to not focus on anything. I like in Headspace, when I was started with Headspace, basically, it's so interesting as I'm talking about this. I'm getting messages as I'm reading the messages on YouTube and getting distracted from the actual question, which I think is just so relevant for this talk. But for the meditation, I basically, as you do it over and over again, you develop the practice, or you condition yourself to be a better meditator. So the regular practice, I think, is the key thing. In Headspace, they speak about watching your thoughts like drift away or like float away. And that to me has been a really helpful exercise. I also think the concept of your third eye, which is essentially it's like right above your eyes, like at your forehead. And I think focusing in that space allows you to clear the focus from any like distractions or thoughts. But it's part of it. I mean, I'd say over the past 2 weeks, I've been practicing just about every day, 10 minutes every morning. And the morning is when I like wake up and think about the most things. But in the past, I'd say 3 or 4 days, I've seen that it's been way more focused, and it's just really about practicing every day. I think, it's so much less about the theory and really just the regular practice. Um, so Beth says, I like the idea of time boxing to avoid procrastination. What do you do if something urgent comes up while you're in a time box? Um, this is, it's pretty interesting. There is nothing urgent that comes up in a time box, because if you're like indistractable and in a state of not being distracted and are actually focusing on what you're focusing on and are following these ideas around notifications and interruptions and communicating that you are not in a distractible space, I think, the communication is really important. You don't know about something else urgent because you are in a state or place of not being interrupted. And I think that's one like key aspect. I mean, these are all great questions. Um, that if you don't know about it, it's not urgent. And the other thing is this metric around 80% of people find that the interruptions are trivial. So I think human nature is we want to interrupt, we want to ask people for other information, and in general, I my view is like most of the time it's not that important, and it's becomes a default where there's this support system or someone thinking that there's really something urgent. And I don't know if that's helpful, but that's my view is like if you are in an indistractable state and you can't be distracted, um, urgency is not, you know, I don't know. Urgency is like life or death to me, and I don't like find I- there's ways to like look at that in a relative scale, but overall for me it's like there is nothing really too urgent, and you realize that when you can step back from things and realize that. Um, Mauricio said office spaces are becoming more open space oriented, having desks with no divisions and no closed offices. Do you see these types of spaces go against creating a distraction free environment? Um, I think it really depends on like what office culture looks like. I think open spaces can be really great. I think there needs to be some sort of conditioning or methods to manage interruptions or distractions. I think every person is different. For me, I definitely have, I work in open spaces, and even in a coffee shop, sometimes like distraction or background noise can be really soothing to how I'm working, and like the idea of people around is really nice. I think that, there's a certain energy that comes with that. Um, my my thought is, you know, I, I think that they can. I really think it depends. That's a really difficult question. There's so many factors that play into that, such as, how do people respect others' time? Um, what type of work is in these specific environments? With the work that we do at Nolte, it's all knowledge work, and I think that takes deep focus and dedication and commitment in order to actually achieve things. So um, I think I would pair that with it really depends on what the office and company culture is. Um, Joshua asks, is it important to also lock the scope of work while time boxing? If not, how can we approach feedback so that it does not have the same effect distractions have on task completion? Feedback so that it does not have the same. Just thinking about that. I, in terms of the scope of the work for the task, um, it could. I mean, it really depends. The scope of work of a task while time boxing. So, like I mentioned before, 30 minutes of focusing on email could be a task. There's multiple things that happen within that task. But the idea is that you use that 30 minutes very effectively in order to prioritize and respond to what's most important. For me, there's no defined scope in that task. If it's something else where I'm planning, I might start to write down like what are the steps that I need to do? And this like also goes back to the planning aspect. What are the steps that I need to work through in order to achieve the outcome that I want for that task or achieve the outcome that I want within that time box period? And you say, if not, how can we approach feedback so that it does not have the same effect distractions have on task completion? Um, Thinking about that one. I'm not really clear on the question. How can we approach feedback so that it does not have the same effect distractions have on task completion? Um, yeah, feedback, I guess, yeah, you mentioned that I answered this question to my answer to Beth, but feedback is, to me, this is like actually another thing that I've really recently been like learning about feedback. I think feedback should be really structured, and I think there should be set time for it, with a clear like understanding or scope of like what feedback looks like. If there's something to be presented, it's like what should feedback accomplish in terms of the presented idea or task or whatever needs to be done. It's helpful to know what the expectations are around feedback. Um, doesn't look like there's any questions. Thank you all, and have a great day.